The wind howled down from the jagged peaks like the devil himself come to collect. In the small church at the edge of Crestfall, a young woman walked alone down the aisle in an ivory dress the color of surrender. No father at her side, no flowers, only the heavy silence of townsfolk who knew exactly what this was not a wedding but a transaction, a debt paid in flesh. Outside the mountains waited, ancient, unforgiving. They had swallowed men whole for generations and given nothing back but silence and snow. She had been sold to settle her father's sins, delivered to a stranger who lived where the world ended, a man carved from pine and grief who asked for nothing and offered even less. But in the shadow of those peaks, something dangerous was stirring. Not hatred, not fear, something far more treacherous. Hope. In the high country, debts are never just about money. Some are paid in blood, some in years of loneliness, and some in the slow, aching birth of trust between two broken souls who never asked to belong to each other. This is the story of the mountain man's debt bride, and the mountain always collects what it is owed. The church smelled like pine resin and old judgment. Nora Wren walked down the aisle alone, no father beside her, no flowers in her hands, nothing but the dress she'd sewn herself 3 years ago for a spring dance she never attended because her mother got sick that week and never really got better after. The dress was ivory. Now it looked like an apology. Every pew was full. The entire town of Crestfall had turned out, which said something about small towns and their appetite for spectacle dressed up as concern. Mrs. Phelps whispered behind her gloved hand. The Dunmore brothers smirked from the third row. Even Pastor Gideon looked like a man performing a ceremony he wasn't entirely sure God had signed off on. Nobody looked happy for her. Nobody looked happy at all. At the end of the aisle stood Cole Hardin, and Nora's first coherent thought, the one that cut through all the noise and fear and the low roar of blood in her ears, was simply this. He is very tall, 6'3", maybe more, broad through the shoulders in a way that came from work, not vanity. Skin darkened by years of mountain sun and wind. Dark hair pulled back from his face in the plain, practical way of a man who had no mirror to consult and wouldn't have consulted it anyway. His shirt was clean, freshly pressed even. But it was clearly the only good shirt he owned, the cuffs slightly frayed, the collar worn soft from many washings. He was not what the town had expected. The town had expected a villain, someone leering and rough, someone who deserved the whispers. What they got instead was a man who stood at the altar with his hands loose at his sides and his eyes fixed somewhere around the fourth pew to his left. Not looking at Nora, not looking at anyone, like he was already somewhere else. Like he was already on the mountain. She kept walking. Because what else do you do? The floor was cold even through the soles of her shoes. The organ was playing something that might have been a hymn in a previous life, and Nora Wren, 19 years old, kept putting one foot in front of the other. Her father had not come this morning. Too ashamed, maybe, or too drunk, or too deep in whatever dark corner of his own making to face the thing he had arranged. She didn't know which. She had stopped trying to calculate Frank Wren's movements 2 years ago when she realized the math never added up. Her mother had died 3 years before, which was in its terrible way a mercy. She would not have to see this. Pastor Gideon began to speak. Nora barely heard the words. Her mind was doing its own inventory, cataloging exits, calculating distances, running the numbers on a situation that had no good numbers left in it. The bank held the debt papers. Cole Hardin had paid $2,500 to clear her father's account, and in exchange Frank Wren had offered the only thing he had left that someone might conceivably want, his daughter. The word nobody was saying out loud was sold. Everyone was thinking it. Do you, Cole Hardin, take this woman? I do. His voice was low, rough at the edges, like a man who spent most of his days in conversation with trees and horses and didn't much bother with people. But it was certain, no hesitation, no waver. Which was more than Nora could say for herself. And do you, Nora Wren? She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. The silence stretched. 3 seconds. 5, 7. Someone in the back row coughed. Mrs. Phelps stopped whispering. Pastor Gideon's eyebrows rose exactly 1 inch above their resting position, and Cole Hardin looked at her, for the first time, directly. His eyes were dark brown, the color of creek water in October, and his expression was not what she expected. Not impatience, not anger, not the cold calculation of a man who had purchased something and was waiting for delivery. Just waiting. The way you wait for something you are not sure is coming, but you wait anyway. I do, Nora said. A whisper, but enough. Then by the power vested in me, Pastor Gideon said with the undisguised relief of a man completing a task he had found deeply uncomfortable, I now pronounce you man and wife. A beat. You may kiss the bride. Cole's jaw tightened. He stepped forward, and Nora's whole body went rigid, spine-locked shoulders up, the instinct of a person bracing for something they cannot stop. He didn't grab her, didn't reach for her face. He leaned down slowly, deliberately, and pressed his lips to her forehead. Brief, light. The kind of touch you give a child, or someone you are trying very hard not to frighten. Then he stepped back. It's done, he said quietly, to Pastor Gideon, not to her, and turned to walk out of the church. Outside there was a wagon, not a carriage, not anything with a painted side or a cushioned seat. A working wagon with a canvas cover that had been patched in 2 places and 2 dark horses who looked like they had opinions about standing still in the cold. This is it, Nora said. The words were out before she could call them back. Cole paused with one hand on the wagon frame. He looked at her, not unkindly. Were you expecting something else? I don't know what I was expecting. He nodded once, like that was a reasonable answer. Then he held out his hand to help her up. She ignored it. She grabbed the side of the wagon and climbed up herself. The dress caught on everything. The wood was cold under her palms. By the time she settled on the bench, her face was hot and her hands were scraped, and she had torn a small hole in the hem that she couldn't afford to think about right now. Cole said nothing. He walked around, climbed up beside her, took the reins. And they moved. The town watched them leave. Nora felt it, all those eyes tracking the wagon down the main road and out toward the tree line. The weight of being watched by people who have already decided who you are and are simply waiting to see if they were right. She had a new name now, Mrs. Cole Harden, the girl who got bought. The road climbed into the foothills almost immediately. The buildings of Crestfall fell away. Pine trees crowded close on both sides. The air changed cooler, sharper, carrying something green and mineral that Nora had never smelled before. The smell of elevation, of a world that had nothing to do with the one she'd grown up in. The only sounds were the creak of the wagon and the soft percussion of hooves on packed dirt. Nora stole glances at the man beside her. Cole kept his eyes on the road. His face was expressionless, not closed off exactly, more like empty of performance, like a face that had simply stopped bothering to arrange itself for other people a long time ago. His hands on the reins were scarred. Rope burns, old cuts healed white. The thick calluses of someone who worked without gloves, not because they couldn't afford them, but because the idea hadn't occurred to them. He didn't wear a wedding ring, neither did she. How far, she finally asked. Another 2 hours? Do you come to town often? No, just no. Not no, but I can if you need something. Not no, but we can work something out. Just no. A flat stone dropped into still water. Nora swallowed her next 12 questions. They rode in silence for close to an hour before Cole spoke again. The house isn't large, he said. She waited. 3 rooms, I didn't... He paused, rearranged something. I wasn't prepared for company. I'm not company, she said. I'm your wife. He flinched, actually flinched. Just slightly. A small contraction around the eyes, like the word had touched something that wasn't expecting to be touched. Yeah, he said quietly. I guess you are. The ranch came into view as they crested a long ridge. Nora's breath caught. Not from beauty, from scale. From the sheer absolute completeness of its isolation. The cabin sat in a small valley below them, ringed on 3 sides by dense pine forest, and on the 4th by a long slope of winter-gray meadow. A barn, a corral, 3 smaller outbuildings, a creek line marked by darker vegetation winding along the eastern edge of the property, and beyond all of it, mountains, ridge after ridge fading from dark green to pale blue to almost white at the horizon. No other rooftop visible in any direction. No road beyond the one they were on. Just wilderness. Just sky. And a loneliness so complete it had its own physical weight. Nora felt it press against her chest like cold air through a gap in the wall. Welcome home, Cole said. The words came out like an apology. Inside the cabin was exactly what he'd promised. Small, plain, scrupulously clean. The kind of clean that comes from discipline rather than habit. From a man who had learned that order was the only thing standing between him and a life that had gotten very quiet. The main room held a cast-iron stove, a table with 2 mismatched chairs, and a sofa that had seen better years but was well maintained, a kitchen corner with a dry sink and shelves of labeled jars, 2 doors leading off the main room, and a third door, smaller than the others, set into the wall at the far end of the hallway that ran behind the main room. The wood darker than the rest, a keyhole, locked. "That room is yours." Cole pointed to the left door. "I'm on the right. There's a lock on your door inside lock." He added the clarification before she could ask, "You can bolt it from the inside whenever you want." Nora stared at him. "Why would you?" "Because you should have a choice." He said it simply, like it was obvious, like it was the most basic possible thing. "I know what people think this is, what they think I did, but you're not a prisoner here, Nora. You can lock that door every night if it makes you feel safer." She didn't know what to say. This was not what she'd expected. None of this was. "Are you hungry?" he asked. "I know, I don't think I could eat." "All right, I'll make something anyway, in case you change your mind." He set her small bag down she hadn't noticed when he'd picked it up from the wagon and stepped back. "Your room has fresh sheets and a quilt. Creek's about 50 yards behind the house if you want to wash up. Outhouse is to the left of the barn." He ran one hand over the back of his neck. "I'm not good at this. At talking. At any of this. But if you need something, tell me. I'll do my best." Then he walked away into the kitchen, leaving her standing in the middle of a strange room married to a man she didn't know, with a lock on her door and nothing else she could say with any certainty. She didn't sleep that night. She lay on the narrow bed still wearing the ivory dress she had nothing to change into. Her father had sold everything before the wedding. She had arrived with one small bag and the clothes on her back, and she listened. The wind against the cabin walls, the low creak of the structure settling in the cold, and from the room on the other side of the wall, Cole, moving, the scrape of a chair across the floor, the soft thud of boots dropping, the particular silence of a man lying down. Then nothing. Nora waited. She waited the way you wait when you've been trained your whole life to expect the other shoe. Tense, counting her own heartbeats. Every small sound in the hallway catalogued and assessed. An hour passed. The moonlight shifted slowly across the floorboards. 2 hours. The house stayed quiet. No footsteps in the hall, no handle turning, no knock. Nothing but the mountain doing what mountains do in the dark. Slowly, so slowly, she didn't recognize it was happening. Until it had already happened, she began to unknot, muscle by muscle. The rigid set of her shoulders loosened by degrees, her hands unclenched from the quilt they'd been gripping. He meant it. That was the thought that finally let her close her eyes. He actually meant what he said. Dawn came gray and cold. She heard Cole before she saw him, the front door opening, boots on the wooden steps. Nora got up, every muscle protesting, and went to the small window in her room. Cole was in the corral, working with a young horse. A bay, maybe 2 years old, still nervous and rough in its movements. The horse kept shying back every time Cole stepped closer, crow-hopping sideways, throwing its head, and Cole kept giving it space. Every time the horse retreated, he stopped, lowered his hands, turned his shoulders slightly, not backing down, just making himself smaller, less like a threat. Waiting, not forcing, not rushing, just standing there with the patience of a man who understood that trust cannot be extracted, only offered, again and again, until the other living thing decides what to do with it. The horse skittered sideways. Cole stopped, waited. Nora watched for a long time. She emerged from her room around mid-morning, still in the ivory dress, hair loose and tangled. She had washed her face in the basin Cole had left outside her door. She hadn't heard him put it there. Cole was at the stove, coffee and bacon. He glanced up when she appeared, just glanced. "Morning." "Morning. Coffee's hot. Food's almost ready." He turned back to the stove. "You need clothes. I'll ride into town tomorrow, see what Patterson's store has." "I don't have money." "I do. I can't keep." "You need clothes, Nora." Quiet. Final. The tone of a man closing a topic, not opening an argument. "That's not something we're going to debate." She wanted to argue. She knew he was right. "Thank you," she said stiffly. They ate breakfast in the particular silence of 2 strangers who have been suddenly required to share a table. Cole ate the way he seemed to do most things, efficiently, without ceremony, fuel rather than pleasure. "What do you do all day?" Nora asked. "On the ranch, I mean. What does a day look like up here?" "Horses. 6 right now, 2 breeding mares and 4 I'm training to sell. Fencing, always something to mend. Hunting when we need meat. firewood before winter hits hard." He set his fork down. "It's a lot of work for one person." "Two now," she said. She heard herself say it, was faintly surprised by it. Cole looked at her for a moment, that unreadable face doing something she couldn't quite name. "You don't have to. I'm not going to sit around doing nothing. I can work." "You ever worked a ranch before?" "No, but I can learn." Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile. Something smaller and more restrained, but something real. "Finish eating," he said. "I'll show you around." The ranch was bigger than it looked from the ridge. Cole walked her through everything. The barn, 6 horses, each one with a name, he said, without consulting any list. The chicken coop desperately in need of repair. The vegetable garden that had spent the summer becoming a garden-shaped rectangle of weeds. The creek spring-fed cold even in summer, clear enough to read the bottom through. "I let things slide," Cole said, standing at the edge of the garden with his arms crossed, taking inventory without embarrassment. Just the flat assessment of a man who had run out of hours. When you're alone, you focus on what keeps you alive. The rest stops feeling urgent. "It matters now," Nora said. He looked at her, and for the first time, the first real time, she saw something in his face that she recognized. Not hope, not anything so large or so easily named. Just something. A small shift like light finding a gap. They worked until the sun went orange and long. Nora's hands blistered. Her back ached from stooping over fence rails, passing nails while Cole hammered. The ivory dress was finished by the end of it, torn at the hem, stained with dirt and pine pitch beyond salvage. But as the sun went down and they walked back toward the cabin in the first companionable silence she'd experienced in days, Nora felt something she hadn't expected to feel on this mountain. Useful. Not bought, not owned, not something with a price. Useful. Dinner that night was venison stew, slow-cooked since morning. Simple. Good. They sat at the small table, and the silence felt different than it had at breakfast. Less like a wall and more like a room two people were learning to occupy together. "Why did you do it?" The question arrived before she'd decided to ask it. The way important questions do, fully formed, slightly alarming, impossible to take back. Cole's spoon stopped halfway to his mouth. "Do what?" "Pay my father's debt. Marry me. You could have—" She searched for the right frame. "You could have found someone who wanted to be here." He set the spoon down. Carefully. Folded his hands on the table and looked at them for a long moment. "I'm 40 years old," he said finally. "I've been alone on this mountain for 7 years. Before that I worked other men's ranches, saved everything, thought about nothing but getting my own land." A beat. "When I finally got it, I thought that was enough. The land, the work. I thought I had what I needed." He glanced up at her. "But it gets quiet up here, real quiet, and you start to realize the quiet isn't peaceful. It's just empty." Nora said nothing. "I didn't go looking to buy a wife," he said, and his voice was firm on that firm in a way that asked her to hear the difference. "I wouldn't do that. But when your father came to me, desperate, out of road, I saw a way to help someone who needed it. And maybe if things worked out—" He stopped, chose again. "Maybe something more than just surviving up here alone." "You pitied me," Nora said. "No." One word, no padding around it. "I respected your situation," he said. "There's a difference." Nora looked at the table, at the grain of the wood, at her own hands already rougher than they'd been that morning. "What if I want to leave?" she said. A long pause. "Then you leave," Cole said. "I'll give you money, a horse, whatever you need to get where you're going." "Just like that. Just like that." His voice was even. "You're not my property, Nora, whatever that paper says." 3 days after the wedding, Will Tanner came up the mountain. He was a young man from Crestfall, maybe 22, 23. One of those people who seem constitutionally incapable of sitting still when something needs doing. He brought flour and sugar that Cole had ordered before the wedding. And he brought, without quite intending, to the first piece of information that cracked Nora's understanding of what had happened to her. She caught him alone by the barn while Cole was checking the south fence line. "The debt," she said. "My father's debt. Do you know the actual amount?" Will shifted, looked at the ground. Will. It's—" he exhaled. "The bank books had it at 1,800, maybe a little under." Nora stood very still. "Cole paid 2,500, she said. "Yes, ma'am." "So there was a difference of $700, give or take. And where did that go?" Will Tanner had the look of a man who had walked cheerfully into a conversation and was only now realizing it had a much lower ceiling than expected. "Mr. Hardin gave it to your father. Said—" Another shift. Said your father told him it was for you, to get you started. Clothes and things when you arrived. The barn was very quiet. Wind through the pine trees above the ridge. A horse moving in its stall. He kept it, Nora said. Not a question. I believe so, ma'am, I'm sorry. She nodded once, turned and walked back toward the cabin. She did not cry. She had no interest in crying. What she felt instead was something colder and more precise, the click of a mechanism settling into its correct position. Her father had taken Cole's money, the money intended for her, and sent her up this mountain with one bag and nothing else. She sat on the edge of her bed, pressed her palms flat on her thighs, breathed, then stood up, went to the kitchen, and started doing the dishes from breakfast. Because the only thing she'd ever known how to do with a fist to the stomach was keep moving. The fifth night she couldn't sleep. This had become a pattern, lying awake, cataloging the mountain sounds she was still learning to identify. Wind in pines sounded different from wind in open meadow. The creek changed pitch with the temperature. The horses in the barn had their own small vocabularies. She was lying there, sorting through all of it, when she heard the front door. Soft, careful, the sound of someone trying not to wake anyone. Nora got up, wrapped the quilt around her shoulders, went to the crack in her door and looked through. Cole was on the porch, sitting on the top step, back to her facing the mountain and the dark. In the moonlight she could see the set of his shoulders, the way he held his head, and in his hands a small wooden boat, carved from a single piece of pale wood, maybe 6 inches long, the kind of thing that takes skill and patience and a great deal of careful time, the kind of thing you don't make for no reason. Cole turned it slowly in his hands, thumb running along the hull, over the tiny railing, the mast he'd shaped with a knife smaller than his thumb. He sat like that for a long time. Then he put the boat in his shirt pocket, stood, came back inside. Nora didn't move until she heard his door close. Then she went back to her bed, lay on top of the quilt, stared at the ceiling. In the morning she saddled the gentler of the 2 horses Cole had shown her and rode the 2 hours down to Crestfall. She found Will Tanner at his family's place near the feed store. The locked room, she said. The door at the end of the hallway. Do you know what's in it? Will looked at her for a moment. Then he sat down on the fence rail. Cole had a wife, he said, about 7 years back. Mountain woman, quiet like him. They had a boy. He paused. The baby came early. She fought hard to keep him. Cole, too. But the fever came in the 2nd week. The boy was 3 years old when it took him. The world went very still. 3, Nora said. Yes, ma'am. Eli, they called him. After the boy passed, Will's voice was careful, respectful. Cole's wife left, not out of meanness. She just couldn't stay in that place after. Went south to her sister's. Cole stayed. Alone, Nora said. 7 years. Nora looked at the road, at the ruts worn by wagon wheels, at the shape of a town she'd lived in her whole life and would never quite belong to the same way again. She thought about the wooden boat, about the locked door, about a man who had not thrown away his dead son's room or the toy he'd carved for him, who had simply locked the door and lived with what was on the other side of it, every day, for 7 years. She thought, what kind of man does that? And then almost immediately, what kind of man are you? She rode back up the mountain. When she returned, Cole was splitting wood in the yard. He didn't stop when she rode in. He kept working with the steady rhythm of someone who had done this 10,000 times and would do it 10,000 more. She unsaddled the horse herself, groomed it, put it away. Then she came out and stood near the woodpile. I went to town, she said. I know, tracks went south. I talked to Will Tanner. The axe came down, the wood split clean. Cole picked up both halves and stacked them. He told me about Eli, Nora said. The axe didn't come down again. Cole stood with it in his hands, looking at the chopping block. His jaw was set in a way that wasn't anger, something more complicated than anger. Something that had been held in place for a long time. I'm sorry, Nora said. I'm sorry that happened to you. A silence with weight in it. Wasn't looking for sympathy, he said finally. I know, I'm not offering it. She stopped, found the right thing. I understand the room now, the quiet, all of it. I understand it better than I did yesterday. Cole set the axe against the woodpile, carefully, like setting something down that mattered. He didn't look at her. He would have been 10 this February, he said. Nora didn't say anything. Because sometimes the only right response is to be still, to let the words land where they need to land without reaching to cushion them. He liked the water, Cole said. Never seen anything bigger than the creek, but I carved him boats. His voice was level, the voice of someone carrying something very full and walking very carefully. He used to float them in the wash basin. Nora looked at the locked door from where she stood. The small window beside it, the dark glass reflecting nothing. "You don't have to explain it to me," she said. "I know." A pause. "But I wanted to." The week that followed was different. Not easier, but different in the way things are different when you've said something honest and discovered the honesty didn't kill you. Cole began teaching her the ranch in earnest, not walking her through it like a tour guide, but working alongside her and letting her figure out what she could. She learned to curry the horses without spooking them, learned which hen would peck and which wouldn't, learned that the garden soil needed breaking before anything could go in, and that mornings were better for it before the ground warmed and hardened. He was a good teacher, patient. He never condescended. When she got something wrong, he showed her again without comment. When she got something right, he nodded. Sometimes that nod was worth more than she had words for. One morning she came to the kitchen to find coffee already made and a pair of work gloves on the table beside her cup. No note, no explanation. She put them on. They were slightly too large. They were exactly right. The Sunday of the second week, Cole said they were going to church. Nora looked up from the mending she was doing. "Why?" "Because if we don't show up eventually, they'll talk more than they already are." "They're going to talk anyway." "Yes," he said. "But there's a difference between talking about people who are hiding and talking about people who aren't." She knew he was right. She didn't enjoy knowing it. She wore the blue dress he'd brought back from Patterson's simple cotton well-made a blue that suited her better than the ivory ever had. Cole wore his good shirt, the one from the wedding. They rode down together, Cole on his dark stallion and Nora on the bay mare who had started just barely to trust her. The stairs began before they reached the hitching post. Inside the church, people shifted in their pews. A corridor of empty space appeared around them wherever they went. Conversations stopped when they passed and resumed at a different register afterward. Pastor Gideon's sermon was about grace and community. His eyes kept returning to Nora. After the service in the yard where Crest Falls social machinery ran its usual circuits of news and judgment, Edna Marsh found her way into Nora's path. Edna Marsh was the wife of the man who ran the bank, a woman of impeccable presentation and very precise opinions. She materialized in front of Nora with the practiced ease of someone who had been positioning herself for this moment since the final hymn. "Mrs. Harden." The name in her mouth sounded like a verdict being read. "How are you settling in up there on the mountain?" "Well enough, thank you, I'm sure." Edna's smile had been refined over decades into something with no visible blade. "Must be quite the adjustment, going from a small calibrated pause, your previous circumstances, to this." "Most things are an adjustment," Nora said evenly. "Of course, and Cole," Edna began. "He's well," Nora said, not giving her the moment she was angling for. Edna's eyes tightened just slightly. "He must be pleased to have company, given how long he's been alone up there." The word alone landed with particular weight, the weight of a woman implying several things she intended not to be accountable for saying. "Mrs. Marsh," Nora said, "I appreciate the conversation. We should get back before the weather turns." She walked away. Her hands were entirely steady. Cole appeared at her elbow. He had been close enough to step in and far enough to let her handle it. "Ready?" he said. "Yes." They walked to the horses without looking back at Edna Marsh, who watched them go with the expression of a woman whose opening move had not achieved its intended effect and who was already planning what came next. The ride home was mostly quiet. Halfway up the mountain, Cole said, "You didn't let her rattle you." "I was rattled," Nora said. "I just didn't show it." A pause. "That's the harder thing," Cole said. She looked at him. He was watching the trail ahead, profile steady in the afternoon light. The face of a man who had learned somewhere along the way to let other people's assessments of him move past without landing. "Nora thought I want to learn how you do that." She didn't say it, but she thought about it the rest of the way home. That night she lay in her room and listened to the mountain. Wind through pines, the creek low and constant, an owl somewhere above the ridge. She thought about her mother, about the woman her mother had been before the illness, practical, capable of a specific dry humor that appeared without warning and then vanished like weather. She thought about what her mother would have made of all this. She would have hated how it started, Nora thought. And then she would have looked at Cole Harden for about 30 seconds and revised her position entirely. She thought about the wooden boat in his shirt pocket, about a little boy who liked to float things in the wash basin and never got to see anything bigger than a creek. About a man who kept a locked room for 7 years and a hand-carved toy because he could not quite let go of the fact that someone had existed and been loved. The moon moved across the floor. She didn't get up to lock the door. She told herself it was because she was too tired. But she lay there for a long time after listening to the stillness of someone on the other side of the wall, who was also, she suspected, not sleeping. And she thought, I don't know this man, but I think I've been wrong about him. And I think he's been waiting very patiently, very quietly for me to figure that out. Outside, the wind shifted. The pines moved. Somewhere on the mountain a horse called out and was answered by another. Nora Wren closed her eyes. And for the first time since she had walked down that aisle cold and alone and certain she was walking into something that would diminish her, she slept without bracing for what came next. The mountain held its quiet, and she let it hold her too. February came like a fist, not a gradual cooling. A fist, closed, hard, dropped straight onto the mountain without warning. Nora woke on the first morning of it to find ice on the inside of her window. Not frost, but actual ice. A thin crystalline sheet formed overnight where her breath had met the cold glass. She pressed one finger against it and watched a small circle clear. Outside, the world had gone white and gray and completely still. The pass road was gone. Not blocked. Gone. Buried under 4 feet of snow that had fallen while she slept, smooth and unbroken as a bedsheet pulled tight. No wagon tracks, no trail, just white in every direction all the way to the tree line, all the way up to where the ridge disappeared into low cloud. Crestfall might as well have been another country. They were sealed in. Nora stood at the window for a moment. Then she put on every layer she owned, which was not enough layers, and went to make coffee. Cole was already at the stove. He looked up when she came in, looked at her face, looked back at the stove. Pass closed last night. I noticed. Could be 6 weeks, could be 8. All right. He handed her a cup. She took it, and that was that. There is something that happens to two people sealed inside a small space for an extended period of time. They cannot maintain distance, not because they stop wanting it, but because real space, the kind you use to protect yourself, requires room to exist in. And there was not enough room in that cabin for 2 people to stay strangers. Not with the same stove heating them both. Not with the same 4 walls holding out the same wind. Not with 6 horses in the barn that needed attention twice a day regardless of temperature or mood. So they adapted, without discussing it, without negotiating terms. They simply found the shape of how 2 people could exist in close proximity without constant collision. Cole took the morning barn shift. Nora took the evening. He cooked most dinners. She started doing breakfast without being asked. He split wood. She stacked it. He checked the fence lines on days the snow let up enough to walk. She kept the inside of the cabin from descending into the specific disorder that accumulates when a man lives alone for 7 years and cares more about function than anything else. The curtains she made from leftover blue cotton were, she was fairly certain, the first curtains this cabin had ever had. Cole looked at them for a long time when she hung them. They're good, he said finally. They're curtains. I know what they are. Then why are you staring at them like a mathematics problem? A pause. Just didn't expect them. You didn't expect curtains. I didn't expect... He stopped, rearranged something behind his eyes. A lot of things. He went back to sharpening the axe. Nora turned to the window and allowed herself a very small smile that she was fairly certain he did not see. He taught her things in February. Not in any organized way, more like the transfer of knowledge that happens when a capable person works alongside an observant one long enough. Things leaked through. He showed her how to read incoming weather in the sky, not by feel alone, which she'd always assumed was superstition, but by the angle of cloud formation over the eastern ridge and the way the wind changed in the hour before a storm. The pressure shift you could feel in your ears. The silence that arrived just before the snow. The mountain tells you, he said one morning, standing outside looking up at the northeast sky, if you go quiet long enough to hear it. Nora looked at the thick gray bank building on the horizon. That's going to be bad. Cole glanced at her. When did you start seeing that? Maybe 2 weeks ago. I wasn't sure I was right. Were you? She thought about the 3 storms since then, each one she'd seen coming before it arrived. Yes. He nodded once, went back to work. But there was something in that nod. She filed it away alongside the others. He showed her one afternoon how the boats were made. She hadn't asked. She simply came into the main room to find him at the table with a small block of pale birch wood and a set of carving knives, and she sat down across from him and watched. He worked with complete attention, slow, certain strokes, nothing wasted. "It's something I do in winter," he said without looking up, "when there's less outdoor work. Boats, specifically. Mostly." A pause. "Other things sometimes." Nora watched his hands. "Eli's was the first one," Cole said, very quietly, still not looking up. "Made it when he was born. Took me 3 weeks because I kept starting over, kept thinking it wasn't right enough." A short exhale. "He was 3 years old. He didn't care if it was right. He just wanted to put it in the water." Nora didn't say anything. "Because some things you witness rather than respond to." "I've made 11 boats since he died," Cole said. He finally looked up. His eyes were steady, not wet, not performing anything, just present with the weight of it the way you are with something you've carried long enough. "Never quite the same as the first one. Don't know why I keep making them." "Maybe," Nora said slowly, "because it's what you know how to do when you don't know what else to do." Cole looked at her for a moment. "Set the knife down." "Yeah," he said, "maybe." The twist came on a Tuesday in February. Nora knew it was a Tuesday because Cole kept a simple calendar nailed beside the stove, not for appointments, but for tracking seasons, the animals' cycles, the practical rhythm of a working ranch. She had started marking the days herself without thinking about it. Just another thing that felt like holding on. Cole had gone out early. A section of north fence had come down under the snow weight. He'd be gone most of the day. The storm that had been building since yesterday arrived at mid-morning, not the gentle kind, the serious kind. Sky going dark between one breath and the next, wind up hard from the northeast, temperature dropping fast enough to feel through the cabin walls. She went looking for an extra quilt. The linen chest in the hallway was deeper than she'd realized. She pulled out 2 quilts, reached further back, and her hand closed around something metal, small, cold, the unmistakable shape of a key. Nora straightened, looked at it lying in her palm, looked at the door at the end of the hallway. She held the key for a long time. The storm was loud against the roof. The fire crackled in the stove. Everything else in the cabin was very still. "Don't," said one part of her. "This isn't yours to open." "He's been alone with it for 7 years," said another part. "And nobody has ever." She put the key in the lock, turned it, pushed the door open. The smell came first. Cedar and old wood and something sealed away so long it had become its own atmosphere. The room was small, a child's bed along the left wall, still made. The quilt pulled flat and smooth as if someone had left it that morning and expected to return. A small pillow, a shelf above the bed with wooden toys arranged in a row, not tidy so much as preserved. Like someone had needed each thing to stay exactly where it was. A carved boat, 3 wooden blocks. A small bear made of rough-sewn fabric, its button eyes still intact, sitting upright at the end of the shelf. A wooden chest along the right wall, closed. And above the bed, carved directly into the wall planks in letters that were deliberate and slightly uneven, the letters of a man who didn't carve words often but was determined to get these exactly right. Eli Hardin, age 3. Nora stood in the doorway, did not go in, looked at the carved letters above the small flat pillow. And something happened in her chest that she didn't have a name for. Not pity, not sadness exactly. Something with more edges, the recognition of a grief that has had no outlet. A man who had locked this room and kept it exactly as it was because he could not dismantle it without that meaning something he was not ready for it to mean. He had walked past this door every day for 7 years. Every morning. Every evening. Every night when he couldn't sleep and walked the length of the cabin in the dark. He had lived with it on the other side of the wall, not healed from it, not destroyed by it, just carrying it. The way you carry something when you have nowhere to set it down. Nora stepped back, pulled the door closed, locked it, put the key back in the linen chest exactly where she'd found it, sat down on the floor of the hallway with her back against the wall, and cried. Not for herself, for a man who had carved 11 boats and never quite gotten the first one right and didn't understand why he kept making them. She heard the front door an hour later, boots stamping snow on the steps, the thud of a cold man glad to be inside. Cole came through trailing cold air and moved directly toward the stove. He stopped when he saw her face. Nora was at the table by then, sitting up straight, hands around a cup of tea she'd made more to have something to hold than because she wanted it. Cole looked at her, looked at the hallway, at the linen chest. Something moved across his face. There and gone. He pulled off his coat, hung it on the peg, sat down across from her. The fire spoke for them. The wind against the roof. The sounds of a storm doing what storms do. "I didn't go in," Nora said. "I opened the door. I looked. I didn't go in." Cole's hands were flat on the table. "I know," he said. "I'm sorry. I found the key and You don't need to apologize." "I do. It wasn't mine to—" "Nora." His voice was quiet, but it stopped her. "You don't need to apologize." A long silence. "I haven't been in that room in 6 years," he said. She waited. "I keep thinking I'll be ready." He looked at his hands. "Then morning comes and I walk past it and I think not today." A breath. "Not today" keeps going for a long time. "You don't have to be ready on anyone else's schedule," Nora said. "I know." He looked up at her. "But it's been 7 years, Nora, and that room still has a made bed, like he's coming back." A pause that had real weight in it. "He's not coming back." The words sat between them. Not dramatic, not performed, just true. "No," she said, "he's not." Cole was quiet for a moment. "He would have been 10 this February," he said, "probably at the age where carved boats are too young and real work is too far off, and he thinks he already knows everything worth knowing." Something happened in Nora's throat. "He sounds like he would have been a handful," she said. Cole looked at her, and for the first time, the absolute first time since she had walked down that aisle in Crestfall, she saw him almost smile. Not quite, but close enough to matter. "Yeah," he said, "he would have been." March arrived with mud and a slow thaw. The snow collapsed in sections rather than melting gracefully. It never does on a mountain. It left behind brown mud and gray slush and revealed wreckage branches down the henhouse roof sagging in one corner, the east garden fence buried under a drift that was taking its time. The pass was still closed, but it felt closer to opening, and something between them felt closer to open too. They talked more. Not always about large things, mostly observations, plans, small histories that didn't hurt too much to share. Nora told him about her mother, the dry humor that appeared without warning, the competence with a needle that Nora had inherited. Cole told her about his father who had taught him the mountain the way you teach a child to read, not by explaining but by pointing. One evening Nora was darning a sock and Cole was sharpening tools when she said, without particularly planning to, "Did you love her, your wife?" Cole's whetstone stopped. "A beat. In the beginning," he said. "Yes." He searched for words with the patience he brought to everything. "We understood the same things. The mountain, the work, the quiet." He paused. "After Eli died, it was like we'd been a team, and the thing we were a team for was gone. And we didn't know how to be anything else to each other." "I'm sorry," Nora said, "for all of it. It was a long time ago. Grief doesn't run on a calendar." Cole was quiet for a moment. "No," he said, "it doesn't." Then the twist arrived with the mud. Will Tanner came up the mountain the first week the pass cracked open enough to let a horse through. He had the look of a man who had been wanting to deliver something for weeks and was only now getting the chance. He told Nora in the yard while Cole was in the barn. Frank Wren had been talking. All winter. At the saloon, at the feed store, at every gathering where men stood with time on their hands and someone else's story to tell. Frank had been going around Crestfall saying Cole had paid $4,500. "He's been saying 4,500, Will said. Not looking at her directly, looking at the middle distance the way you do when you're delivering news you already know is going to hurt. "For you. For the marriage." Nora was very still. "The real number was 2,500, she said. "To the bank, yes ma'am." "And the 700 extra Cole gave him." "Yes, so the actual total was 2,500, Nora said. "And my father told everyone it was 4,500, to cover the money he kept." "That's what it looks like." The mud under her boots was very cold. Somewhere in the barn a horse moved. "He let the whole town think Cole paid nearly $5,000 for me," Nora said, "like buying livestock, and he built the number high enough to hide what he'd stolen." "I'm sorry, Mrs. Harden. I thought you should know." "Thank you, Will." Will rode back down the mountain. Nora stood in the yard for a long time. Then she went inside, sat at the table, put both hands flat on the wood and waited for Cole to come in from the barn. He came in at midday, stomped his boots, washed his hands at the basin, turned to find Nora sitting at the table with the particular stillness of someone who has been holding something in long enough that it has become a physical effort. "Will came," she said. Cole looked at her. He told me what my father has been saying in town, about the money, the number. A silence. "Sit down," she said. Cole sat. "Did you know?" "Yes," Cole said. One word, no softening. "When?" "A few weeks after the wedding, Will came up with supplies and mentioned what he'd been hearing in town." Cole's hands were flat on the table. Steady. "Your father told people the higher number before we even left Crestfall on the wedding day. And you didn't tell me." "No." "Why?" He looked at her directly. Dark eyes, steady as the mountain outside. "Because you had been sold by your father, arrived at a stranger's house in the middle of winter with one bag and a dress you couldn't afford to ruin, and were already carrying more than one person should carry at once. Adding your father's dishonesty on top of that." He stopped. "It wasn't the right time." "You decided that?" "Yes." "That wasn't yours to decide," she said. "I know. I had a right to know." "Yes, you did." He said it without defense, like a man acknowledging a fact rather than deflecting a blow, and that the absolute lack of evasion took some of the heat out of her anger. Not all of it, but some. "Why did you give him the extra money?" she said. "The $700 you gave him beyond the debt." "Because I told him it was for you, to get you started somewhere new." A pause. "I knew he might not pass it on. I hoped he would. I was wrong." "You knew he might steal it, and you gave it anyway." "I gave it because it was the right thing to do with it. What he did after is on him." Nora looked at the table, at the grain of the wood she'd been looking at for 2 months now. This table she ate at, worked at, sat at in the evenings when the mountain went dark. "The whole town thinks you paid nearly $5,000 for me," she said. "The whole town thinks a lot of things. This one matters. Does it?" She looked up. Cole met her eyes. "What the town thinks you're worth and what you're actually worth are not the same number. They never were. And what your father did with the money doesn't change why I gave it." He paused. "It doesn't change what happens next on this ranch, unless you want it to." Nora stared at him. "He should have told me," said the part of her that had been managed and kept in the dark by one man after another her entire life. "He was trying to protect you," said another part, badly, clumsily. "But that's what it was. Those aren't the same thing." "No, but they're not nothing either." She pushed back from the table, stood, walked to the window. Outside, the mountain was entirely indifferent to all of this. The pines stood in the late winter light. The creek moved under its rim of ice. "I need you to tell me things," she said, without turning around. "Even when you think the timing is wrong, even when you think I can't handle it, I need you to let me decide what I can handle." Silence behind her. "All right," Cole said. "That's all I'm asking." "All right." She turned. He was still at the table. Same posture. But something in his face was different. The look of a man who had expected a harder landing and was recalibrating. "Dinner in an hour," she said. "Yeah," he said. And that was that. Ada Croft came on a Thursday in late April. The pass was fully open. The mud was drying. The first green was pushing up through the meadow grass, pale and completely determined. Nora was in the garden doing the first real digging of the season when she heard the horse. She looked up. A woman, young, maybe 22, 23. Riding a horse that didn't belong to her, moving it with the urgency of someone who has made a decision and is riding hard before she can unmake it. She pulled up at the edge of the yard, dark circles under her eyes. A bruise along her left jaw she'd tried to cover with something and failed. Her hands on the reins were steady, but her face was not. "Is this the Hardin Ranch?" she said. "Yes," Nora said. "Are you—" She stopped, swallowed. "I heard about you. In town. What you said at the church gathering a while back, about survival." A breath that came out uneven. "I didn't know where else to go." Nora set down the trowel. "Get down," she said. "Come inside." Ada Croft had married Roy Croft 2 years before. Roy was a large man with a large opinion of himself and a very small tolerance for being disagreed with. He had been charming before the wedding, precise in his cruelty after it, the kind of man who understands exactly how much damage he can do while staying inside the invisible line where other men will still nod to him at the feed store. The bruise was from 3 days ago. Roy had not liked something Ada said about wanting to attend a church gathering herself. Nora heard all of this at the kitchen table while Ada's hands wrapped around a cup of tea and gradually stopped shaking. Cole came in from the afternoon barn check, took in the scene in approximately 2 seconds, said nothing, went to the stove, boiled water, set a second cup on the table, then went back outside to give them the room. that Nora thought watching him go. That is a man who understands things without needing them explained. Ada stayed. Not with any formal announcement, she simply didn't leave that evening, and nobody spoke about it in large terms because large terms had a way of collapsing under their own weight. Cole said nothing about the arrangement, which was itself a kind of saying everything. Roy came on the fourth day. Multiple horses, moving fast. Nora was at the garden fence when she heard them and straightened and felt her stomach drop. Roy Croft. 4 men from town behind him. She went to the porch, stood there. Ada appeared in the doorway behind her. "Go back inside," Nora said quietly. "Lock the door." "Nora, lock it." The door clicked. Roy pulled up in the yard. He was a big man, the kind of big that comes with the assumption that size settles arguments. He had a red face and the expression of a man who believes he is entirely in the right and is annoyed that it requires demonstration. "I want my wife," he said. "Your wife isn't here," Nora said. This was not technically true. She delivered it with complete calm. "I know she's here. She rode Calloway's horse and Calloway saw her head up this road. Then Calloway can come ask her himself." Roy's jaw tightened. "She's my wife. She comes home with me." "She's a person," Nora said. "She goes where she chooses." "That's not—" Cole came around the corner of the barn. He didn't run. He didn't hurry. He walked at exactly his usual pace, steady, deliberate, the unhurried movement of a man on his own land. He came to stand beside Nora and said nothing, just stood there. And the weight of Cole Hardin, standing still and quiet and very large in his own yard, had a quality that Roy Croft, for all his red-faced certainty, appeared to find difficult to assess. "She doesn't want to go back," Cole said. "That's not your business." "You're on my land. Everything on my land is my business. She's my wife." "I heard you." Cole looked at him, steady, direct. "She doesn't want to go back. That's what matters." Roy looked at the men behind him, looking for support, finding uncertainty. "You can't just—" "She stays until she decides otherwise," Cole said. "You want to talk to her, you can try. She'll come to the door or she won't. That's her choice." A pause. "But you don't go through that door without her saying to." Roy stared at him. Cole waited. The thing about Cole Hardin, Nora had come to understand, was that he was very good at waiting, better than most people. Better than people who relied on volume and anger as their primary instruments. He just waited, still as something rooted, and let the other person run out of their own noise. Roy ran out. "This isn't over," he said. "It isn't," Cole agreed, "but today it is." Roy wheeled his horse. The 4 men followed. They rode back down the mountain, and the dust they raised settled, and the yard went quiet. Nora let out a breath. Cole looked at her. "You all right?" "Yes." She thought about it. "You—" The corner of his mouth moved. "I've had harder conversations." The fence came down a week later. North section. The long stretch along the upper meadow. Not from weather, the snow was gone and the ground was firm. Someone had cut it, methodically, post by post along a 40-yard stretch, leaving clean cuts in the wire that no freeze-thaw cycle produces. 12 horses got through before Cole found it at dawn. He came back to the cabin with a face like the mountain in February. "Roy," Nora said, or someone he paid. We need to get the horses back first," he said. "Then we deal with the rest." They went into the hills together. This was not, Nora reflected, the kind of task she had been thinking about when she agreed to learn ranch work. Tracking scattered horses through heavily wooded terrain in the mud of early spring, with the temperature low enough to be unpleasant and the underbrush dense enough to be a genuine obstacle. But she had been on this mountain for 3 months. She was not the same person who had arrived in an ivory dress with 1 bag and borrowed gloves. She could read tracks now. She knew which horse would spook and which would come if called. She knew how to move through timber without announcing herself with every footstep. Cole worked ahead of her, circling wide, pushing horses back toward the lower meadow. She worked the east flank, turning them when they tried to go further into the timber. They worked without speaking. They had developed over months of proximity and shared labor, the kind of communication that doesn't need words. The anticipation of each other's movements. The understanding of who goes where. By afternoon they had 11 horses, 1 mare still out. Nora found her in a small clearing half a mile up the ridge, standing at the tree line, looking down at the valley with the expression of a horse who had done exactly what she wanted and was in no hurry to discuss it. "Hey," Nora said. The mare looked at her. Nora walked forward slowly, steadily, not rushing, not forcing, the way Cole had shown her. the way she'd watched him in the corral that very first morning, giving space, waiting, letting the animal decide. The mare waited. Nora got the lead rope on her. They walked back down together, and when they came out of the trees and into the lower meadow, Cole was there mending the broken section of fence. He looked up when she appeared with the mare, said nothing for a moment. "Good," he said. One word. But she knew exactly what it meant. That night they sat on opposite sides of the small table, both tired in the particular way of people who have been physical all day. The lamp was low, the stove was steady. Outside the mountain was dark and entirely indifferent to Roy Croft and his grievances. "He'll try again," Nora said. "Probably. Ada can't stay here indefinitely while he decides when to stop." "No. So she needs to do something, file something, make it official, get a record somewhere." Cole leaned his forearms on the table. "She'd have to go to the sheriff, stand up in front of people and say what happened." "I know. That's not easy. I know that too." Nora looked at him. "But what's the alternative? She stays on our mountain for the rest of her life while Roycroft tells himself she's coming home any day now." Cole thought about it. "You should talk to her, not me." "I'm going to. I just wanted to think out loud," he said. "Yes." He nodded. "All right." She looked at him across the table. This man who had been a stranger 4 months ago, who had paid her father's debt and offered her a lock on a door and a key he didn't have to give her, who had told her the truth when she asked directly and withheld it once when he'd been wronged to, who had stood in his yard without a weapon and been more immovable than 5 mounted men. "Cole," she said. He looked at her. "Thank you, for today, for all of it." He held her gaze for a moment. "You found the mare," he said. "You know what I mean." A pause. The fire made its small sounds. "Yeah," he said, "I do." She went to her room that night and stood in front of the door, and realized she hadn't thought about the lock in weeks. Not deliberately, not as a conscious decision. She had simply stopped thinking of it as something she needed. When did that change, she thought? She couldn't find the moment. It had not been a moment. It had been a slow accumulation of mornings and evenings and shared silences and work done alongside someone who had never not once given her a reason to be afraid. She went to sleep without locking it, and woke in the morning to coffee already made cold in the barn and the mountain doing what it always did. Outside, the first wildflowers were coming up through the meadow grass. Small, pale, entirely determined. Nora put on her boots and went to work. May came in green and relentless, like the mountain had been holding its breath all winter and finally let go. The meadow grass came up fast. The creek ran high from snowmelt. The apple tree beside the barn, the one Nora hadn't known existed until the leaves appeared, put out blossoms so white they looked deliberate. Ada was still at the ranch, still sleeping on the sofa, still helping in the garden with the focused quiet of a woman who has learned that making herself useful is the safest way to exist in someone else's space. But also slowly, in the way healing actually works, starting to sit up straighter at meals, starting to offer opinions about the garden layout without being asked, starting occasionally to laugh. The morning Ada laughed at something Cole said, a dry observation about one of the hens and her apparent personal vendetta against the fence post, Nora caught the sound of it and felt something loosen in her own chest. Because Ada laughing meant Ada was still here, present. Not just surviving the minutes. But surviving the minutes was not a long-term plan. The conversation happened on a Tuesday morning in the garden. "I need to do something," Ada said. Not asking permission, just a statement delivered into the middle distance. Nora kept turning soil, waited. "Roy's not going to stop," Ada said. "Men like Roy don't stop because you leave. They stop because something makes them stop." "Like a court record," Nora said. "Like a court record." A silence, a robin in the apple tree. "I'd have to testify," Ada said. "In front of people." "Yes." "In front of Roy." "Yes." "And his friends, who will say—" "They'll say what men like that always say," Nora said. "That you're exaggerating, that you're unstable, that you were difficult to live with." She stopped digging, looked at Ada directly. "They'll say it. It'll land. It'll hurt. And the jury will still hear what you said. And the bruise on your face when you arrived. And the fact that you rode 2 hours up a mountain in April because you had nowhere else to go." Ada was quiet. "I'm not telling you it's easy," Nora said. "I'm telling you what it is." "Will you come?" Ada said. "To the courthouse." "We'll both come," Nora said. "Cole too." "He doesn't have to." "He'll want to," Nora said. "He just won't say so." Cole said nothing when she told him that evening. He was cleaning tack in the barn. saddle across the sawhorse. He kept working, finished the section he was on, set the cloth down. When, he said, Will's going to help file the paperwork this week, hearing probably 3 weeks after. All right. That was the whole conversation. And Nora stood there a moment thinking, I have spent my entire life around men who said a great deal and meant very little. And this one says almost nothing and means all of it. Word spread through Crestfall the way it always does, fast, hot, distorted. By the time it reached Edna Marsh, which took approximately 4 days, Ada had been variously described as having abandoned her husband, been manipulated by Nora Hardin, and representing some kind of threat to the established order of domestic life in the county. Edna Marsh called a community gathering at the church. The announcement came through Will, who delivered it with the expression of a man bringing news he already knows is unwelcome. She's calling it a community discussion, Will said, about standards of conduct. Whose conduct? Nora said. Will looked at the ground. Right, Nora said. Cole said at dinner the night before, we don't have to be there. Yes, we do. No, we don't. Edna Marsh's opinion of you doesn't require your attendance. Nora set down her fork. It's not about her opinion, it's about Ada. If we don't show up, the story that gets told tomorrow night is the story Edna wants told. And Ada has to face a jury made up of people from this town in 2 weeks. She looked at him. The story matters. Cole pushed a piece of venison across his plate, looked up. All right, he said. The church was full. Every pew. Standing room along the walls. The collective heat of an entire community that had turned out telling itself it was here for justice while actually being here for the show. Ada sat between Nora and Will Tanner in the 3rd row. Her jaw was set. Her hands were in her lap. She had the look of a woman who had made a decision and was not going to unmake it just because the room was larger than she'd hoped. Cole sat on Nora's other side. Straight. Still. Taking up exactly the space he needed, and no more. Edna Marsh was formidable. That was the word, not large, not loud, simply formidable in the way of someone who had spent 40 years learning how much authority could be projected through posture and silence. She spoke about values, about the sanctity of marriage, about what happened to communities when the bonds holding them together were treated as optional. She spoke with the precision of someone who had written this out beforehand. She did not mention names. She didn't have to. When Edna finished, 3 people spoke in support of her position. Roy Croft sat in the back row with his arms crossed and said nothing, which was somehow worse. Then Ada stood up. The room went quiet in the way of people who were not expecting this. Ada was 22 years old, and she had been frightened for most of the last 2 years, and she stood in front of a full church in the town where she'd been born, and her hands were shaking, and she spoke anyway. She said Roy Croft had hit her 11 times in 2 years. She knew the exact number. She said it clearly. 11. She said he had locked her in the house for 4 days after she attended a church gathering without his permission. She said she had left because she wanted to live to be 30 years old. She said all of this in the same tone of voice someone uses to describe weather, not because she felt nothing, but because she had been living with it for 2 years and had had 2 years to understand that it was simply what had happened. The facts were the facts. And then she sat down. The silence that followed had weight. Then Edna Marsh made a mistake. She said, a wife's difficulties with her husband are a private matter. What happens inside a marriage stays inside a marriage. Nora stood up. She hadn't planned to. She was on her feet before she'd made any conscious decision to stand the way you move when something moves through you that is larger than deliberation. A private matter, Nora said. Her voice was even, but it carried. 11 times. That's the private matter you're describing. Edna's chin came up. Mrs. Hardin, I married a man I didn't choose, Nora said. In this church, 7 months ago, and I stood here and said I do when what I meant was, I have no other options. And everyone in this room knew it, and half this room talked about it. A beat. So let's not pretend this community keeps private matters private. It keeps them private when the truth is inconvenient and public when it entertains. The room was very still. Ada Croft stood up in front of all of you and told you the truth, Nora continued. The exact number, 11. And you want to discuss values and sanctity. All right, let's discuss them. What value are we protecting when we tell a woman to go back to a man who hit her 11 times? What exactly is sanctified in that? She heard her own voice, heard the way it had stopped shaking without her noticing it start. I didn't come to this mountain willingly, Nora said. "I want to be honest about that. I came because I had no options, and my father made a decision for me that I had no say in. And what I found up here—" She stopped. "Chose. I found a man who gave me a locked door and told me to use it whenever I needed to, who let me take up space, who taught me things and asked nothing back except honesty and work." She paused. "That is not the story anyone in this town told about my marriage, but it is the true one." She sat down. Her heart was going considerably faster than her voice had suggested. Cole's hand found hers on the bench between them, and held it. Then Cole stood up. The room reacted the way a room reacts to something unexpected from an expected source. A small collective intake. A recalibration. Because Cole Hardin did not speak at gatherings, everyone in Crestfall had known him for years in the distant way you know a mountain man who comes to town twice a season for supplies and leaves. And nobody could remember him standing up to say anything in public. He stood, and waited until the room was as quiet as it was going to get. "I grew up in these mountains," he said. His voice was low, but the room was silent enough that low was sufficient. "My father worked this land before me, his father before that. The way I was raised—" He stopped, chose each word the way he chose everything, deliberately, without waste. "The way I was raised, a man is measured by how he treats the people who can't do anything about how he treats them. That's the measure, not his acreage, not his credit at the bank, not how many people nod to him on the main street." He looked around the room. "Ada Croft told you the truth tonight," he said. 11 times. He said it the way she had said it, plain, without drama. "The question being discussed in this room is not whether Roy Croft should answer for that. The question is whether the woman who left him should have." A pause. "That is the wrong question, and I think most people in this room know it, and I think they'll find the right one when they're not being watched." He sat down. No flourish, no call to action, just the statement of a man who had said what he came to say and had nothing to add. The silence lasted longer than silence usually does. Then Mrs. Patterson, the woman who ran the general store, who had been coming to this church for 40 years and had said nothing in any of the previous gatherings, stood up in the 5th row and said, "I think we're done here," and sat back down. And somehow that was what broke it. Not applause, not drama, just one practical woman stating a fact. People began to move, to gather their things, to find the exits. Roy Croft left first, without looking at anyone. Edna Marsh left second, composed, straight-spined. She looked at Nora on her way past and said nothing. But something in her eyes was different from what it had been. Not softer, not apologetic, just different, like a woman looking at something she recognizes but hasn't seen clearly until now. Outside, Will Tanner appeared at Nora's elbow. "That was something." "Was it effective?" Nora said. "Ask me in 3 weeks, after the hearing." Ada came out last, blinking in the evening air. She looked wrung out in the way of someone who has done something that took everything they had. "You all right?" Nora asked. "I don't know yet," Ada said. "Ask me later," which was, Nora thought, the most honest answer anyone had given to any question all evening. The hearing was on a Wednesday in the 3rd week of May. They rode down together, all 3 of them. Cole on his dark stallion, Nora and Ada on the mares. The morning was clear and cold, and the mountains were sharp against the sky. The courthouse was a squat, functional building at the east end of Crestfall's main street, the kind of building that had seen a great deal of human difficulty and remained entirely unmoved by it. Roy sat at a table on the left with a lawyer from the county seat. Roy himself looked contained, confident in the way of a man who has already decided the outcome. Ada sat with Will Tanner at the table on the right. Nora and Cole sat in the gallery, 3rd row, together. Roy's lawyer did what Roy's lawyer had come to do. Built a picture of a difficult wife, an unstable woman, a devoted husband wrongly accused. He did it competently with the efficiency of someone who had built this picture before. Some of it landed. Nora watched the jury's faces, felt the particular helpless anger of watching a story get assembled from wrong pieces in front of people who have no access to the correct ones. Then Ada took the stand. She knew what to say. She knew to answer what was asked and not more. But what nobody had coached her on, because it wasn't a technique but a quality, was the devastating plainness with which she said things. She said Roy hit her the first time 7 weeks after the wedding. She had dropped a dish while washing up. He had hit her across the face with an open hand and told her it wouldn't happen again. It happened again. She said all of this in the tone of voice someone uses to describe the weather. Not because she felt nothing, but because she had been living with it for 2 years and had therefore had 2 years to understand that it was simply what had happened. She had no interest in dramatizing it. She just needed it on record. Roy's lawyer cross-examined. He suggested she was exaggerating. She said she was not. He suggested she'd been influenced by Nora Hardin, who had her own complicated history with marriage. Ada said Nora Hardin had given her a bed and a cup of tea and let her make her own decisions. He suggested Ada had left her husband over a minor disagreement and was using the court to punish him. Ada said she had left her husband because she was afraid of him. Present tense, right now, at this table. The lawyer smiled the smile of a man who thinks he has scored a point. "If you're so afraid of him," he said, "why are you here?" Ada looked at him. "Because being afraid," she said, "doesn't mean you don't show up." The jury was out for 4 hours. They came back with guilty of assault, not guilty of unlawful imprisonment. Not everything, not all of it. A partial verdict that acknowledged the truth without fully accounting for it, which is, Nora had come to understand often what truth gets in rooms where the people deciding have their own blind spots and their own investments in how things work. Roy would face a fine, possibly a short sentence, a record. Not nothing, not nearly enough. Ada sat in the courtroom after the jury filed out and said nothing for a long time. Then she said, "Is that it?" "That's what they gave," Will said carefully. "He gets a fine and a record. It follows him permanently." "It follows me too," she said, and there was nothing to say to that. Because it was true. She would carry this, the hearing the lawyer's questions, the experience of saying what had happened to her in a room full of people and watching 12 men decide what it was worth. She would carry that, and Roy would carry a fine and a mark in a ledger. That was justice in the year they were living in. Not what it should be, what it was. Nora sat beside Ada in the empty courthouse. Not speaking, not fixing, just there. Frank Wren came to the ranch in the first week of June. Nora was at the south fence when she heard the horse, a gray roan with an irregular gait she'd known her whole life. She watched it come up the road and felt nothing dramatic, just a low, quiet settling, like a door closing on something that had needed to be closed for a long time. Frank looked older. Not the way time makes people older, the way choices do. He pulled up outside the fence. "Nora," he said. "Father." A silence. "I heard about the hearing," he said. "The Croft business. People are saying you and your husband made a difference." "Ada made the difference," Nora said. "She was the one who stood up." Frank's eyes moved to the ranch behind her. The expanded barn, the new corral, the garden that was full and green and nothing like the weed rectangle it had been in February. "Looks like you've made something here," he said. "We have," Nora said. Another silence. She waited the way Cole had taught her by example, the way the mountain had taught her by being what it was. Waiting without filling the space. "I was wondering," Frank said, "if you might be able to help me, just to get back on my feet. A small—" "No," Nora said. Flat, clean, not angry, not soft. "Just no." Frank's hands tightened on the reins. "I'm your father." "Yes," Nora said. "You are." She looked at him. This man who had gambled away her mother's medicine money, who had sold her to pay his debts and pocketed the extra without a word, who had spent the winter inflating the price of her own sale to hide what he'd stolen. She looked at him and felt not hatred, not love, something simpler and sadder than either. "You took everything you could take from me before I came up here," she said. "You took the money Cole gave you for me. You told everyone he paid twice what he paid so they'd think of me as something with a price tag. You made me currency, and then you didn't even keep accurate books." She paused. "There's nothing left for you here. Not because I hate you, because there's nothing left." Frank sat very still. And then something happened that Nora hadn't expected. His face changed, not dramatically, not with speeches or tears, just changed, the way a held breath is released. A small collapse of something that had been held up by a long time of effort. "You look like your mother," he said, very quietly. Nora said nothing. "She'd have handled things the same way," he said. "Direct, no performance about it." "She would have," Nora agreed. Frank looked at the road ahead. "I'll go," he said. "All right." He turned the roan and rode back down the mountain. Nora watched him go, watched until the dust settled, watched until the sound of hooves faded into the pines, then turned back to the fence and kept working. Cole found her there an hour later, coming along from the north, checking the post repairs. He stopped when he found her in the south section. Looked at her face. "Your father came," he said. "Yes." "And left." "Yes." A pause. "You all right?" Nora thought about it honestly, not the reflexive response, but the actual inventory. "I think so," she said. She found it. He looked like someone who'd run out of road. And it made me sad, not for what he took, for what he never was. Cole was quiet for a moment. "That's a harder grief than anger," he said. "Yes," she said, "it is." He picked up the other end of the wire she was working with, held it steady while she attached it. They worked in silence, and that was enough. In July, Ada left for her sister's place in the next county. Not driven out, not fleeing, choosing. Her sister had a house, a spare room, a contact at a school that needed help. A beginning. She hugged Nora for a long time in the yard before she left. "You showed me it was possible," Ada said, "to be afraid and do things anyway." "You already knew that," Nora said. "You just needed somewhere to stand while you remembered it." Ada mounted up, rode down the mountain. Nora watched her go, felt the quiet of the empty sofa in the main room, the garden with only one pair of hands, then went back to work. That evening, Cole came in from the barn with dirt on his hands and an envelope in one of them. He set it on the table. "Open it," he said. She did. A document. Legal paper. Official stamps and formal language and signatures in the right places. The property deed for the Hardin Ranch. 2 names. Cole Hardin. Nora Hardin. Equal ownership. Recorded. Legal. Permanent. Nora looked up. "When did you—" "Last month. Had Will handle the paperwork." He was at the basin washing his hands back to her, like he'd learned that sometimes it was easier for people to hear things when you weren't looking directly at them. "This ranch. The work you've done on it. The horses you've trained. The garden. All of it." He turned, dried his hands. "It's yours as much as mine. It should say so somewhere. It can't be taken back." Nora looked at the 2 names side by side. "Cole, you don't have to say anything about it." "I want to." "All right." She folded the document carefully, held it in both hands. "I came up this mountain because I had no other choice," she said. "And for the first month I kept reminding myself of that, like a reason to stay angry, a reason not to—" She stopped. "A reason not to let this be real." He was looking at her, and then somewhere in February, she said, "In the cold with the ice on the windows and the horses and the fence and the carved boats and all of it somewhere in there, I stopped reminding myself." She looked up. "I stopped keeping the distance, and I don't know exactly when, but I know why." "Why?" he said. "Because you never gave me a reason to keep it." The room held that. The stove. The creek outside. The sounds of a mountain evening in July, warmer and fuller than anything she had known in February. "I have to show you something," Cole said. He took her up the mountain at dawn the next morning, past the ridge. Up a trail she hadn't known existed, narrow, steep through old-growth timber where the trees were so large the morning light fell through them in columns. And then out, into a clearing at the top, flat grass and wildflowers. Looking down at the valley below, and the ranch so small from here, so complete. The barn and the corral and the kitchen garden and the apple tree in bloom. And beyond it, mountain after mountain fading into the distance. 3 flat stones arranged in a line at the edge of the clearing. Old, weathered, set deliberately. "My father," Cole said. "His father. And—" he pointed to the 3rd. "My son." Nora stood beside him and looked at the stones. "I brought Eli up here when he was born," Cole said. "Tradition in my family. You bring the new one up so the land can know them." A pause. "I don't know if that makes sense to anyone who didn't grow up with it." "It makes sense," Nora said. Cole crouched, picked up 2 smaller stones from the grass nearby, turned them in his hands. Then from his shirt pocket his knife. He worked for a few minutes in silence, carving into the flat face of each stone. He set one down. Nora looked at it. Her name, carved into mountain granite. Nora Hardin. He set the second one beside it, his own name, next to hers. "On this mountain," Cole said, "when you set the stone it means the land knows you. It means you belong to the place and the place belongs to you." He stood, put the knife away. "The deed is what the courthouse has. This is what the mountain has." Nora looked at the 2 stones, at the 3 older ones beside them, at the valley below where their horses moved in the early morning light. She thought, "I walked into a church 7 months ago and I was so afraid I could barely say 2 words. And now I'm standing on top of a mountain with my name in a stone. It felt like ground, like solid, permanent, belonging to you ground." "Cole," she said. "Yeah, I love you. A silence. Not the uncomfortable kind. Not the kind that means the words have landed wrong. The kind that means a man is taking a moment to believe something he wasn't sure he was going to be allowed to believe. I know, he said. She looked at him. I love you too, he said, more quietly. Have for a while. A pause. Didn't want to say it before you were ready to hear it. How did you know when I was ready? I didn't. The corner of his mouth, not quite a smile. Almost. But you said it first. So I figured. Nora looked at this man. This specific, infuriating, gentle, patient, carved 11 boats man who had given her a locked door and waited an entire winter for her to stop needing it. Come here, she said. And he did. In August, Edna Marsh came to the ranch. Alone. No buggy. Just herself on a bay horse riding up the mountain road at the measured pace of a woman who has made a decision and is in no hurry because the decision is already made. Nora stayed at the fence where she was working. Edna dismounted without being helped, tied her horse to the fence post, straightened her skirt. I've been thinking, she said, about some things I said at various gatherings this year. Nora waited. I wasn't wrong about everything, Edna said. I still believe in the institutions I was defending, but... She stopped, looked at the ranch, at the 2 names painted on the barn board above the doors, Hardin and Wren. I think I confused the institution with the people inside it. When you challenged one, I took it as challenging the other. Nora said nothing. Ada Croft, Edna said. What happened to her? I didn't want to see it, because if I saw it, I had to decide what it meant. She met Nora's eyes. It meant the institution I was defending was being used to hurt someone, and I wasn't ready to see that. I'm not asking for anything, Edna said. I just thought you should know I've been wrong about some things this year. Thank you, Nora said, for coming up here to say that. Edna nodded once, mounted, turned back toward the road, then stopped. You've made something real up here, she said, without turning around. Both of you. That's worth noting. She rode down the mountain, and Nora stood at the fence and thought, that is what changing your mind looks like when you don't have the language for apology. It looks like riding up a mountain and saying the hardest thing in the fewest possible words. She recognized it. She'd been learning it all year. In September, Nora asked if they could go into Eli's room together. Cole said yes. They went in the morning, light coming through the small window. The room the same as it had always been, the flat quilt, the shelf of toys, the fabric bear, the carved boat. Eli Hardin, age 3, still in the wall above the bed. Cole stood in the middle of the room for a long time. Nora stood beside him, not directing it, not managing it, just there. Cole reached out and picked up the boat from the shelf, turned it in his hands. The first one I made him, he said. I started over 4 times, kept thinking it wasn't right enough. You told me, Nora said. He loved it anyway. He held it. He didn't care about right enough. He just wanted to put it in the water. Nora looked at the small boat in his large, scarred hands. Maybe that's the thing, she said slowly, about the boats. Maybe you keep making them because you're still trying to make the one that's right enough. She paused. And maybe he already told you that it doesn't have to be. Cole was very still. Then he set the boat back on the shelf, carefully, in its place, picked up the small fabric bear, looked at it, set it back too. He turned, looked at Nora. I want to put a chair in here, he said. A reading chair, something comfortable, so it's a room you can actually be in. All right, Nora said, not clearing anything out, not changing anything, just making it a room again. All right. He looked at the carved name on the wall. He existed, Cole said. He was here. He should have had more time, but he was here, and that doesn't need to be locked away. Nora reached out, took his hand. He held it. They stood in the small room with the morning light coming through the window and the mountain holding everything up outside, and did not say anything else, because there was nothing else that needed saying. 3 years later, the Hardin and Wren Horse Ranch had a reputation that reached 4 counties. The barn had been expanded twice. The corral doubled. A training facility with a covered pen for winter work that Nora had designed and Cole had built over 2 summers. 4 employees now, good ones. The breeding program had produced 12 foals the previous spring, all sold. Several returned customers asking for first access to the next season's stock. Ada wrote from the next county. The school had kept her on. She was engaged to a man who taught mathematics and had, by her account, never once made her feel afraid. Nora read the letter twice and put it on the mantelpiece where she could see it. Will Tanner had become their primary contact for county business, legal filings, land records, the ordinary bureaucracy of a working ranch. He was good at it, better than he gave himself credit for. Edna Marsh had not come back up the mountain. But when Nora came to Crestfall for supplies, Edna nodded from across the street. Not warm, but real. The nod of someone who has revised their position and is not going to make a production of it. Roycroft had left Crestfall the previous winter. Nobody seemed to know exactly where. Frank Wren sent a letter in the spring. 2 sentences. He hoped she was well. He hoped she was happy. No request, just hoping. Nora wrote back 3 sentences. She was well. She was building something she was proud of. She hoped the same for him. That was all. But it was honest. On an evening in September, 3 years and 8 months from the day she had walked down that aisle in the ivory dress, Nora sat on the porch of the cabin and watched the horses in the meadow below. Cole came out with 2 cups of coffee, set one beside her, sat in the other chair. The mountain was doing what it always did at this hour, going from gold to pink to purple in the west, the pines darkening, the creek catching the last of the light. "I've been thinking," Cole said. "About what?" "The south pasture. If we cleared the timber on the east edge, we'd have another 4 or 5 acres of grazing." "That's a winter's work," Nora said. "We have the winter." She looked at the south pasture, calculated it the way she'd learned to calculate things, not just the work, but the return, the horses they could run, the foals they could produce, the reputation that would follow. "All right," she said, "let's plan it out." He nodded. They sat in silence. The horses moved in the meadow. June, the bay mare, 3 years old now, fully trained, the best horse on the property, stood at the edge of the creek and looked up at the hill as if she knew she was being watched. "Can I ask you something?" Nora said. "Yeah." "That first morning, in the corral, the young horse, the way you kept giving it space and waiting." She paused. "Were you thinking about the horse, or were you thinking about me?" Cole looked at his coffee. A long pause. "Both," he said. Nora looked at him. He looked back. And then finally, fully, completely, he smiled. Not almost. Not the restrained version. The real one. The one that changed the whole shape of his face. Made him look younger and more tired and more real all at the same time. Nora felt it in her chest, the way she always felt it, like something warm and solid settling into place. "You could have just told me," she said. "You wouldn't have believed it." "Probably not. Had to show you instead." She shook her head. "Infuriating. Effective." She laughed. He watched her laugh. And the mountain held them both, the way it always had. Patient, permanent, entirely indifferent to anything that wasn't true. And everything between them, the whole impossible, unlikely, hard-won thing they had made from nothing, was exactly that. True. All of it. True.